just leave you two just for a second?
Yeah.
Just because we will come back to them. It's not that Mike wasn't making some very good points there. But we're joined now by the Secretary of State for Work and Pensions, Mel Stride, who we don't want to keep waiting this morning. Good to see you this morning. Can I start by asking you about Mark Logan? I know he's a former MP, because you were all former MPs at the moment, who most of us probably hadn't heard of. But the fact that he has gone and said he's now going to back Labour in the next election doesn't say much to what the Tories are putting forward, does it?
Well, I think it's a great shame that he's decided to do that. He'll have his own reasons for doing that, although I did notice in his letter when he made this decision that he published, he didn't mention a single Labour policy that he was attracted to. And I think that lies at the core of why this election really matters, because what we've got is a choice between a government whose plan is working, we're getting inflation down, jobs are improving, real wages are rising, going into the future, or we've got a Labour Party who have no plan at all and I'm afraid are going to take us back to square one. So that's really what this is all about, this election, and that's why it's so important that we're out there fighting for every vote.
But the optics are really not good, are they? This is the third Tory MP to defect in the past 5 weeks. It follows Natalie Elphicke and Dan Poulter. They've all listed different reasons. Mark Logan saying that the Tory party is now unrecognisable from the party that he joined a decade ago. But all three of them have simply lost hope and they've lost faith in the party. And you can imagine that many of your would-be voters would be feeling the same way.
Well, as I say, the big things that matter at this election, and what I'm out every day talking about, are the plans that we've got for the future of our country. Now, we've gone through a really tough time. I think most people accept that. We had COVID that shrank the economy by 10% overnight. We came forward with furlough and other measures to save the economy, to preserve millions of jobs. We've got inflation down because of that war between Ukraine and Russia, the problems that caused, and we've now got the economy turning. It's the fastest growing economy in the G7, equal fastest at the moment in the last quarter. That's something that we can build on. But the reality is, if we now pass this over to Keir Starmer, you know, we are going to go back to square one. Because, I mean, just like, you know, you mentioned MPs. Look at what's going on with Diane Abbott at the moment. We don't really know what's going on. He seems to have known the result of this report back in December. He's now doesn't seem to be entirely clear as to whether she can stand or not. Angela Rayner has now stepped into the ring to tell him what to do. You know, we really need a choice here, I think, to be very clearly framed between you know, ourselves with a plan, a clear sense of direction for the future of our country, and what's going on with Labour, which is frankly all over the place.
So what's interesting, what struck me this morning, and as you know, we get a sort of press release about what every politician who comes on would like to talk about. Doesn't necessarily mean we will talk about it. But yours is about a 2018 pamphlet published by the Shadow Chancellor, which, I mean, it just struck me this morning as being negative campaigning. Whereas, well, I mean, don't the public want to hear some positive campaigning from the Tories about what you would do, how you would change things if you continue to be in power, rather than just attacking what Labour may do if they get into government?
Well, we've been very clear, exactly, you mentioned pensions and the pamphlet, on our approach to pensioners. So we brought in the triple lot plus. That is going to mean hundreds of pounds of tax cuts for pensioners going forward, and we think that's really important. Now, Labour have dismissed that entirely, which means that basically they're up for effectively a tax on retirement. So under Labour, you're going to see millions of pensioners being dragged into income tax. Now, what this pamphlet is about, and I think this is really important here, is that Labour have come forward with £38.5 billion worth of unfunded spending commitments. Now, don't take my word for that. Those are official Treasury analysis that's had a look at that really properly and really thoroughly. They've ruled out raising income tax or national insurance. Under pressure from our press department, they finally clearly ruled out increases to VAT, and that leaves the question, where are you going to find the 38 billion? Now, if you look at what happened in 1997 when Gordon Brown came in, he raided workplace pensions, £118 billion raid. He then gave pensioners a 75p increase, and we ended up with the fourth highest pension of poverty in the whole of Europe. And if you look at what is said in that pamphlet that Rachel Reeves has authored, it's very clear. They're looking at reducing the tax relief on people paying into pensions if you're on the higher rate of tax, raising £20 billion as it was then at that time. So you're looking at a party that's coming forward with a tax raid on pensioners on the state pension, and if they're going to make their sums work, a tax raid on workplace pensions. And we don't think that's right. We've seen it before with Gordon Brown. It was all kept very quiet. It didn't appear in the manifesto, and then they sprung it on us. And that's what everybody's really got to start waking up to, is how are they going to find this money, all this unfunded spending? People are going to have to start saving today, frankly, to pay for a future Labour government.
But you mentioned your plans, the triple lock plus promise. Why now? Why such a last-minute policy? You've had 14 years to enact this change, and meaningful policies to actually help pensioners and the financial challenges faced by over 60s has been lacking for many years, especially during COVID. We had so many emails in yesterday when we were talking about this from pensioners saying that they are struggling week on week to put food on the table and to heat their homes. Why is this happening now? It doesn't seem meaningful.
Well, I think it's very meaningful. But in terms of your point about whether we've supported pensioners or not, I've already pointed out what Labour did in the fourth highest pensioner poverty in Europe. We've seen a reduction in pensioner poverty of 220,000 by 2010. We brought in the triple lot, which, remember, increases pensions at a more rapid rate than would otherwise occur. We were the party that brought that in. We have something called pension credit, which is there for those lower earning pensioners. You mentioned cost of living challenges. We had a specific cost of living payment that went out to millions of pensioners. That was £300 in the last year. And many of those pensioners who were on pensioners credit also qualified for other cost of living payments, which in total could come up to over £1,000. So we've done all we can really to help pensioners, but we want to go still further. And that's why we want to make sure we save pensioners tax, we keep millions of pensioners out of tax, as opposed to Labour, who've ruled all that out. They've dismissed it entirely, and that means that under Labour you're going to see millions of pensioners dragged into paying income tax, a retirement tax that we do not feel is fair.
But what are you doing to future pensioners? Because, I mean, you talk about this £38.5 billion black hole, which you say Labour's got in its finances. They say you've got a £71 billion black hole in yours, a huge chunk of which, of course, is driven by the desire to get rid of national insurance, which then raises the question, well, in a decade or two, is there going to be any state pension at all anyway?
So let's just look at these two apparent black holes. The £38.5 billion that Labour has been scrutinised as part of an official Treasury analysis. It's a very robust Conservative view of what their unfunded spending plans are. The bulk of the figure that you've just quoted that they assert we have by way of a black hole is an aspiration that we have over the longer term to abolish national insurance. That is not the same as a manifesto commitment, nothing like it. All of those items in that £38.5 billion black hole that Labour have will be absolutely expected to appear in Labour's manifesto. The things that they are pointing their finger to with us are purely things that people have said in the past, oh, we'd like to do this, we'd like to think about that, or in the longer term and so on. You cannot equate the two. The reality is we're left with £38.5 billion black hole for Labour to fill. They've ruled out certain tax increases. Incidentally, they haven't properly ruled out the pension raid that I've just described on workplace pensions. They've said it won't feature in the manifesto. Well, that's the kind of language that Gordon Brown used back in the day. And Gordon Brown, remember, is cited by Rachel Reeves as her great mentor. OK, and I'm afraid we are looking at a playbook here that we've seen before. If they're to raise that kind of money and they're ruling out the big three taxes, then this is exactly the kind of thing that you would be expecting them to look at.
Look, we're almost out of time with you, but I did just want to ask you about the parliamentary candidate, the Tory Catherine Fletcher, who's posted on X that excrement has been posted through her letterbox. Politicians, it does highlight, doesn't it, that the threat that politicians are going to be under during this election campaign. What are you doing to support and look after your parliamentary candidates?
Well, can I firstly say that this is just a disgraceful thing, and whoever did that, it is utterly shameful. I would like to see the same kind of energy generally from the public in terms of expressions of disgust for this kind of behaviour, whichever political party is impacted, as often I'm afraid you find on Twitter in terms of attacking politicians. I think society generally has to call this out. In terms of support for Catherine, she's a fantastic colleague. She's a very resilient and capable lady, and she will come through this absolutely fine. She has the support totally of her ex-parliamentary colleagues on her side of things, and I've absolutely no doubt that the party centrally will be providing her with whatever support she needs. But this is absolutely disgraceful, and people should be taking to the Twitter sphere now in their thousands and thousands to call this out.
Well, look, I think that's a very fair point. Mel Stride, good to see you this morning. Thanks very much indeed. Treat all the candidates with a bit of respect. Doesn't matter what party they're standing for or who you support, frankly.